Who is Meg to you?
Meg, imagine me, but darker and shorter and with less hair and smarter, and also a really big fascination for soup. There you have it. That's my best friend. What's up, guys? It's Shaky. It was kind of forced. I'm on medication. It's not really working that well, if you were wondering. So, listen, last video, we had some controversial opinions. We read some Reddit stories, and people do some up shit. And there was some controversial opinions about said up shit on whether or not it should be allowed, and how evil campaigns may or may not promote this stuff. So today, I'm gonna give you my top 3 tips on how to run an evil campaign without being a asshole. And I'm also gonna go over what I personally would allow in an evil campaign and what I wouldn't allow. And that section is just gonna be, it's just gonna be a lot of bleeps. I'm just gonna talk and it's gonna be one long bleep of what I wouldn't allow. Let's get started. In the context of D&D, I am okay with, there's obviously gonna be murder in my campaign. I feel like that's just a kind of given. I couldn't imagine a campaign without killing people. I would be okay with genocide. I think I actually have it currently going on in my campaign and they just haven't really interacted with it much yet. So it says more about my players than it does me, if you think about it. Topics such as religion and sexuality, politics, and all of that good stuff, I'm diving in. Now, sexual assault, no. Bisexual, yes. That in a weird way. So, I will touch on more controversial themes, but I think there is a very fine line that you have to know when to draw, and that's also a line that you need to draw with your players. We can get into more of that later. A lot of these topics are going to fall naturally into world building, and if you want to build a living world, you are going to have to touch on some harder topics. But also, it is a fantasy world, so if you don't want to include some things, it's your world. Just take it out. Do also think it's a little unrealistic and unbelievable and takes the magic out of the world if there's absolutely no conflict at all. So say, for example, with classism, you don't like that, so everybody has everything an equal amount. That's communism. That's fine, but in another section, I feel like there needs to be different hardships. You need to bring it in a different way then if you're not going to put it in there. It truly won't feel like a living world if there is absolutely no conflict or no issues whatsoever throughout the society. You can even make it dystopian if you wanted and make it seem like there's not, but actually, deep down, it's super How I feel about racism, bad. I will include it in my campaigns. I don't try to throw that in too intensely because this is one of the things where I'm like, this is a fantasy world. It doesn't really need to be there. I personally, as a DM, I like to go after my players for different things than just what species or race they are. I think it's more fun going after them different ways than being like, oh my god, you're a dragonborn. But it is in there slightly when the story calls for it. Prostitution I have in my campaign as a very background player. A lot of these issues I feel like they don't need to be a forefront of your campaign, but they can still be in the background of your world building of a description to make it, again, that living world, but you don't need to dive head first into it and make systems for how the brothels work. It doesn't need to be that. It's unless the story benefits from it, I feel like it doesn't really need to be delved into too much. I don't think that rape and sexual assault have any place in my world. I don't like them, and I don't think that that enhances the story in any way. So that is something that I just draw the line at, and I don't feel the need to put that in my story because it just feels kind of like you're just making your players imagine sexual assault and why this is supposed to be fun. Yes, there's going to be some intense moments, but I don't want my players leaving feeling bad after the session, and I feel like some of these topics would make that happen. I think that's a line that needs to be drawn with your players. I think that's a conversation that needs to be had and understand where everybody's boundaries are. If some people aren't comfortable with torture, then don't do torture. But if that is something that would possibly affect somebody in your party, obviously don't do that. Don't make your players feel leaving bad. For me, I know I would leave feeling bad if I made everybody imagine sexual assault. So I'm not gonna do it. Feels like a different kind of, it just feels so up. Torturing somebody's also up, but I feel like it goes hand in hand with fighting sometimes. And I do understand why people, it depends how you're torturing someone also, I guess. Somebody takes it a little too far. These are fine lines to be walking, people. Fine lines. I am open to most topics as long as it is a story propellant. With sex, I feel like it needs to be fade to black with me. I don't need to sit there and role play with my friend how they're getting That feels like they should maybe just do some things on their alone time and not play that out with her friends. I think romance is fine. I think romance is funny. I feel like I just got okay with romance in our campaign because my sister is in my campaign. I'm not really trying to romance my sister, even if it is in a role-playing way. So that's just somewhere where I draw the line. But I'm not necessarily opposed to romance in other situations. But it always is a fade to black for me. I don't think that the more intimate details need to be shared with the world. Again, the internet exists. Download Tinder, bro. Incest is something I will touch on, and I have touched on, but I don't think anybody has caught it in positions of power. Because I think it is very common for people, when they have a lot of power, to insist on a pure bloodline. The more power people get, I believe the more corrupt they become. They will do anything to preserve said power that they hold. And a lot of times people will do this in an incestual way and to have the purest bloodline and have the power be the purest it could possibly be. I don't really think that it's necessary to be like, oh, the bar keeps mom. Again, everything for me has to be story driven. That doesn't feel story driven. Maybe having somebody in power and getting your players to understand how up the whole hierarchy is, that could be understandable. But when it's just for shits and giggles, I think there's funnier jokes that can be made. I would not necessarily do like a forced abortion. I would do something that was like of their own choice and own free will. I feel like a lot of these topics are, for me, are dependent on how they are occurring and the circumstances around said topic. Whenever I feel like you're introducing anything that could be seen as controversial or harmful, I feel like you have to make sure you're doing it in a tactful way. My big no-nos are around sex. And that is just my personal belief. Some people could be more open regarding that. I feel like I don't necessarily need that at my table. It might differ at a different table that I'm at when I'm not playing with my siblings, because I'm often playing with my siblings. But even then, that sex feels like it should be more intimate between you and your partner or partners. I don't know your vibe. But I feel like it doesn't necessarily need to be a part of your friend group. If one of my players brought up a topic I'm uncomfortable with, we'll say regarding sex, just because that's the biggest proponent I've been against so far, I would explain to them that I am okay with letting them have a romance, but it will be a fade to black. That is a strict boundary I have, and if they're not okay with that, they can go find another table that is okay with that. To recap, the things that I'm not necessarily okay with are any sexual content really at all. Maybe romance is fine, but it's got to be fade to black. And I will touch on more sensitive topics as long as it pertains to storytelling, and more importantly, that my players are okay with it. Everybody has to be on the same page in my book. And if I touch on something at my table that somebody's not okay with, I hope to God that I've done a great job at making a space where they feel comfortable coming to talk to me about it, because that's the last thing that I want. I I've said it before, I've said it again, D&D is about having fun. If you're not having fun, what the are you doing? Anyways, but now we're going to talk about my top 3 tips about how to actually include these controversial topics and make an evil campaign without being a dick. My number 1 tip is going to be relating to talking with your players, and that is consent forms. I know not everybody likes to make consent forms. They think it's too woo-woo or whatever the they think it is, but you don't necessarily have to do it like this as long as you're willing to talk to your players and understand what is and is not acceptable. I personally prefer consent forms because I know some people feel embarrassed saying that they're not okay with something, so they can send it to me and not give it to me anonymously. And that way they can mark down what they're okay with, what they're sort of okay with, and what they're absolutely fine with. So they could do this anonymously, or they can put their name on it and let me know. We can have a conversation, and that way I know it's literally written down for me what they're okay with and what they're not okay with. Consent forms have been the easiest one for me to figure out. We can link below in the description which consent form I use for my tables, but there are tons out there. You could probably even make your own. Some go super in-depth, some are just really general. So the consent forms, they go over things like anything from mental abuse to physical disabilities. They can talk about bugs. They can talk about, obviously, sex. They can talk about different forms of violence, from police violence to infant death to kidnapping to cannibalism. They can go super in-depth, like I said, or they can be just general, are you okay with sex, but not necessarily breaking it down between fade to black, explicits, between PCs and NPCs, all of that. It could just be yay or nay, or it could be, are you okay with racism? Doesn't need to break it down with slurs or genocide or concentration camps necessarily. But those are just some of the topics. I actually have 2 main ones that I like, so we'll link them both down below. But that brings me to tip number 2. Tip number 2, have a session 0. Talk to your players. Not only does this help you for a lot of aspects outside of the game, like world building and prepping and all of that, but you can have a face-to-face conversation with them and tell them what themes you're planning on exploring, what might come up. And this is where you could do, if your group is more comfortable doing it in person, you could fill out the consent forms together so you can talk through any questions that you may have. If you don't want to do the consent forms at all, this would be a good place to talk to people and understand what they are okay with and what they are not okay with. I'm always a big fan of session 0s. I think it's a great place for everybody to talk about their characters, talk about what to expect from the campaign, and for everyone to be on the same page. Because the last thing you want to do is start and somebody's uncomfortable with your main topic of the campaign. That's going to be not only awkward for you, but for the player, and this avoids those issues right off the bat. There is a difference between running an evil campaign and just being a dick. You can be evil without raping people. It's possible. You can make evil decisions without aborting a baby for them against their will. There are so many options to be evil. You do not need to go down that road. And if you're going down that road, that says a whole lot more about you than it does anything else. Go to therapy. Tip number 3, pay close attention to your players. Listen, I'm a big proponent of the DM doesn't have to be in charge of everything, but when you're playing an evil campaign, I think it is important for the DM to be aware of what their players are feeling. Yes, it's also important for players to speak up, but sometimes a topic may be brought up that the player didn't know that they were uncomfortable with when the consent forms were out, and all of a sudden they're getting uncomfortable. If you as the DM see that, talk to your player, bring them aside, talk to them after the session, say, hey, I noticed you were uncomfortable when X, Y, and Z happened. Let's talk about it. If they are saying that they just didn't know it was going to happen and they just weren't prepared, but they're fine with it, at least you've had that conversation. If they say they're totally uncomfortable with it, fix it. They're your friend. Why would you? Don't be like, well, it's a game. You, they're your friend. And if you're just going to be like that, maybe don't be a DM. Because listen, we all have control issues as DM, but if you're that much of a control freak, go to therapy. You shouldn't be a DM. If you're gonna be too butthurt when someone gets uncomfortable with something, don't be a DM. Or be a DM for people that you're okay with these issues or these topics. That's why we have consent forms. It's not that hard. Alright guys, this is my top 3 tips on how to run an evil campaign without being a dick. I know that some people are okay with sexual assault, abortions without choice. Nah, I'm not one of those people, okay? And that is a precedent I have set at my table. And if you haven't learned from this video to do that with your own table, go ahead, take that little bar at the bottom, go ahead and move it all the way back to 0 and just watch it again. Because clearly you did not pick up the main point of this video, which is to talk to your table and make sure everyone's on the same page. If you guys want to go more in depth about running an evil campaign and like ideas for that, that is definitely something we can touch on more in depth in the future. Just let me know in the comments below. But yeah, overall, I would say don't be a dick, don't be an asshole, talk to your friends. It's pretty much what I got for you guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Shake it up. I think I would do abuse. I would do animal abuse. I would do cannibalism. I think I'm actually a secret agent for the US government.